Who's actually going to get the most out of a 6.8 revolutions per minute overhead mixer, and who would be better off putting their money toward a different piece of lab gear? If you're wondering whether the price tag makes sense for a day-to-day workflow, or if you're just trying to avoid the classic mistake of buying a mixer that spins either too fast or not fast enough for your protocol, you're in the right place. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through the kind of lab you'd set this up in, the practical upsides, the hidden trade-offs, and whether it's worth the investment for a typical researcher. First off, the Velp F10610118 ROTAX isn't a generic kitchen appliance you'd find on a countertop. It's built for the sort of benchtop or small room environments where you need an overhead stirrer that can keep a gentle, uniform motion without spattering or introducing bubbles. Think of a cell culture lab that needs to keep a suspension of delicate mammalian cells moving just enough to avoid settling, or a chemistry bench where you're mixing a viscous polymer solution that would shear apart if you crank the speed too high. Those are the real-world scenarios where a 0-30 RPM range, with a 1 revolution per minute resolution, actually matters. If you've ever tried to use a magnetic stir bar in a tall conical flask, you know the frustration of losing contact as the liquid level rises. An overhead mixer like this one eliminates that problem because the impeller hangs above the vessel, providing consistent torque regardless of flask geometry. That's a concrete benefit you'll notice the first time you replace a magnetic stir bar with the ROTAX in a 250 ml baffled flask. The solution stays in motion, and you avoid the dreaded dead zone in the middle of the liquid. Now, who should consider buying this? If you're a graduate student or postdoc who spends a few hours each week mixing cell suspensions, protein solutions, or low-viscosity media, the ROTAX gives you a hands-free option that frees up your bench space. The electronic speed control, which lets you dial in any speed between 0 and 30 revolutions per minute, is intuitive enough that you won't need to spend days learning a new interface. The fact that the resolution is 1 revolution per minute means you can fine-tune the motion for particularly sensitive applications, like keeping a stem cell culture just barely agitated to prevent differentiation. Conversely, if you're running a high-throughput screening lab that needs to spin dozens of plates simultaneously, you'll quickly discover the ROTAX's limitations. It's designed for 1 vessel at a time, and the overhead arm takes up a decent amount of vertical space. For a setup that relies on multi-well plates or needs to change vessels in under a minute, a magnetic stir plate with a universal plate adapter is a more efficient choice. The same goes for anyone who only ever mixes low-viscosity liquids in small tubes. A simple vortex mixer or even a pipette can handle that without the extra cost of an overhead system. Let's talk about the practical strengths that actually show up in day-to-day work. The biggest win is the safety aspect. Because the impeller is driven by an enclosed motor and the speed can be reduced to a complete stop, you're less likely to generate aerosolized droplets, which is a real concern when dealing with biohazardous material. Users have reported feeling more at ease when the motor shuts down automatically if it detects an overload, a feature that isn't always obvious on the spec sheet but becomes apparent once you run the unit for a few cycles. The electronic control also eliminates the need for manual gear changes, so you don't have to wrestle with a crank that can slip or wear out over time. On the flip side, the ROTAX isn't without its quirks. The device is built to run on standard 115V mains, which means you'll need a dedicated outlet in many labs. Plugging it into a shared power strip can lead to voltage drops, especially if other high-current equipment is running nearby. That's a small but real inconvenience that can cause the motor to stall during long runs. Additionally, while the resolution is impressive, the actual torque at the lowest speeds can feel a bit weak if you're trying to stir a highly viscous medium like a 5% agar solution. In that scenario, you might find yourself having to increase the speed to 8 to 10 revolutions per minute just to keep the mixture moving, which could introduce unwanted shear forces. Another hidden trade-off is the physical footprint. The overhead arm extends about 30 centimeters above the bench, and the base unit sits on a fairly wide platform to stay stable. If you're working in a cramped biosafety cabinet, you'll need to make sure there's enough clearance, otherwise you'll be constantly bumping the arm into the cabinet walls. Some labs solve this by mounting the unit on a rolling cart, but that adds an extra piece of equipment you have to keep track of. Now, let's address value for money. The price point sits in the mid-range for laboratory overhead mixers, which means you're not paying